The sound wasn't loud. It was soft, too soft. A tiny click like metal brushing metal. But inside ADX Florence, the most secure federal Supermax prison in America, even a soft sound could mean danger. Michael froze on his steel bed. He pressed his ear against the cold concrete wall. Another sound. A faint scrape. Someone was trying to talk through the vents. That should have been impossible. In ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, no one was supposed to hear anyone else. The cells were soundproof. Walls were thick. Doors were heavy steel. Every word died before it reached the hallway. But tonight, someone whispered through the air vent. "Mike, you hear me?" Michael's heart jumped. No one had said his name out loud in months. The voice was breathing fast. "Wait. Something's wrong. The cameras, they're cycling." That made Michael sit up straight. The cameras never cycled at ADX. They never blinked. Never turned off. Never stopped moving. For the first time in months, the hallway lights flickered. A long buzz rattled overhead. And the red emergency light glowed faintly above the door. The prison, the one built to be perfect, unbreakable, escape-proof, was glitching. Michael whispered back, "What happened? What did you see?" But the voice in the vent answered with something far worse than he expected. "Someone in D block, they're gone? Gone. Not dead. Not sick. Gone." A person disappearing from ADX Florence, the prison built so tightly that an ant couldn't leave without being noticed, was unthinkable. Impossible. A secret that should never exist. But before Michael could ask anything else, a loud alarm erupted. The steel door of his cell shook. Heavy boots thundered through the hallway. Someone shouted, "Lock down. Now." The red light turned solid. The hallway went silent again. And the voice in the vent whispered one last thing. Soft, scared, shaky. "Mike, they're coming to your wing next." Now, how did Michael end up inside the Alcatraz of the Rockies? The place where people vanished, cameras glitched, and secrets were buried under concrete? To understand the moment everything went wrong, we have to go back to the day he first arrived at ADX Florence. He remembered the bus ride. Hands cuffed, feet shackled. Black hood over his head so he couldn't see the route. The sound of the engine felt like thunder in his stomach. A guard next to him whispered, "Next stop? Final stop." When the hood came off, Michael saw it, ADX Florence, stretching across the Colorado desert like a fortress from another world. Razor wire fences, gun towers, motion sensors, sand-colored concrete that looked like it hadn't moved in years. It didn't look like a prison. It looked like a place where people were meant to disappear. Inside intake, everything was white, metal, or cold. An officer scanned his eyes, then his fingerprints. Another officer read rules that sounded less like rules and more like warnings. No contact. No movement without escort. No conversation between inmates. 23 hours locked in. 1 hour alone in the yard. A psychologist sat behind a glass wall and wrote notes without looking at him. Michael didn't know what she wrote. But he remembered her final words. "If you hear voices, they're not real." He didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. Not until months later, when silence became heavier than sound. His cell was small, just a concrete box with a slot for food and a slit window showing nothing but sky. The silence was thick. So thick that Michael began talking to himself just to hear a voice. Even the guards didn't speak unless they had to. The worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was the routine. Same food. Same hour in a metal cage they called a yard. Same exercise alone. Same strip searches. Same silence. Days didn't feel like days. Time didn't feel like time. Michael described it like this. At ADX, time doesn't pass. It just sits on your shoulders. But some things broke the silence. A rumor from a guard. A strange flicker in the hallway lights. A moment when the cameras paused for a second too long. A sound through the vents. That's how Michael first heard whispers of D block. A wing for inmates who needed more monitoring. More silence. More control. Some men there didn't leave their cells for weeks. The guards never talked about D block. But inmates did. At night, through the vents if they found a way to push air just right. They whispered about a man who tried to escape through the drain. Another who didn't speak for months. Another who started laughing at the walls. But no one had ever used the word gone. That's why tonight was different. That's why Michael's heart raced when the voice whispered through the vent. Something had happened. Something big. Something ADX Florence didn't want anyone to know. The boots outside his door grew louder. 2 officers stopped directly in front of his cell. Keys jingled. One said, "He's next." Michael stood up, wondering if the door would open. wondering if the glitch in the cameras meant something worse. Wondering if the secret from D-Block had finally reached him. The lock clicked. The steel door began to slide open. And the moment the light from the hallway fell across his feet, Michael saw a shadow behind the officers. A shadow that didn't belong there. A shadow shaped like someone standing in the corner. Someone the officers didn't notice. Someone watching him. For a second, Michael forgot how to breathe. The shadow standing behind the officers didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't step into the light. It just stood there, tall, silent, shaped like a person, but twisted slightly like someone who hadn't stood upright in a long time. The two officers didn't notice it at all. They were too busy unlocking the restraints. "Michael Reed," one of them said. "Step forward." But Michael couldn't move. His eyes were locked on the corner behind them. On the shape that shouldn't exist. ADX cells were monitored every second. Every hallway covered by cameras. No one could stand there without being seen. No one could hide in the shadows because ADX didn't have shadows like that. The officers noticed Michael wasn't stepping out. One snapped, "Move. Now." The other officer leaned in. "Reed, don't make this difficult." Michael swallowed hard. I saw something." The first officer frowned. "What are you talking ABO?" The hallway lights buzzed again. Then dimmed. Then flashed once. Everything shook for half a second. And the shadow disappeared. Gone. Like it had never been there. The officers exchanged a look. Quick, nervous, the kind of look people give when they're pretending nothing is wrong. Then the first officer clicked the cuffs onto Michael's wrists. "Let's go. You've got movement." Movement. The one word every ADX inmate waited for. The rare moment when you could leave the concrete box. But Michael didn't feel lucky. Not tonight. The officers led him down the hallway. Every camera he passed should have blinked green, recording, scanning, tracking. But some didn't blink at all. Some were frozen. And others pointed slightly off-center as if turned by hand. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Michael stepped into another hallway, D-Wing. The one he'd only heard whispers about. The air was colder here. The walls thicker. And the windows? Covered. One officer leaned toward the other. "Wing's still unstable. Tech team said the feeds won't reboot. Should we wait?" "We don't have time." Michael heard every word. And each one made his stomach twist tighter. As they walked deeper into D-Wing, he saw more signs of trouble. A panel on the wall ripped open. Wires hanging like vines. An overhead light flickering non-stop. A cell door left halfway open. A mistake that should be impossible. ADX is built so that doors only open fully or close fully. There is no halfway. Michael stared at the open door. Inside the cell was nothing. Just a mattress flipped over. A meal tray untouched. A sink still dripping. The officer following behind stepped forward quickly and slammed the door shut. He muttered under his breath. "That's the one, that's the cell." Michael turned slowly. "The cell of who?" Neither officer answered. Both stared straight ahead. They kept walking. Deeper. Farther. Into the part of ADX inmates fear most. Finally, they reached a metal door with a small slit window. An officer typed a code. The lock released with a heavy chunk. "Reed," the officer said, "we need you to identify something." "Identify?" Michael felt his heart punch against his ribs. He stepped inside. The room beyond wasn't a cell. It wasn't a meeting room. It wasn't anything an inmate was supposed to see. It was a control room. Rows of screens. Every hallway, every yard, every pod on camera. Or at least, they were supposed to be. Half the screens were black. A few glitched with lines across them. Only one or two actually showed movement, officers running, radios blaring. But Michael's eyes went straight to a blank screen in the center. The label under it read, D112. The missing inmate cell. The one that was open. The one they whispered about. The officer cleared his throat. "Reed, earlier tonight, someone in your wing reported hearing a voice through the vents. We need to know if it came from this cell." He pressed a button. The screen flickered. Then turned gray. Something appeared. Not clearly. Not fully. Just a shape. A blur. A tall figure standing in the back of the cell, exact same height and shape as the shadow Michael saw behind the officers earlier. Michael stepped back so fast he hit the wall behind him. "That's it," he whispered. "That's the same thing I saw." The officers looked at him hard. Then at each other. Their faces said what their mouths didn't. This wasn't normal. This wasn't explainable. This wasn't supposed to happen in ADX Florence. But before anyone could speak, the entire building shook. A loud alarm went off. one Michael had never heard before. A deep, rising howl. The emergency lights flashed red across every surface. The nearest screen lost signal. Then the next. Then all of them. The officer grabbed his radio. "Control, what's happening?" "Control?" "Static." Another officer shouted, "We're losing the whole wing. Get back up." And then, from somewhere deep in D Block, they heard it. A sound no one should ever hear in the most secure prison in the country. A voice, echoing through the vents, loud and panicked. "Help." They got out. A crash exploded above them. Dust fell from the ceiling. The lights went dark. And Michael felt a cold rush of air behind him, like someone standing right at his back.